In the small town of Liberty, Missouri, in 1985, life flowed smoothly. The streets were surrounded by greenery, neighbors knew each other by name, and the local supermarket served as an unofficial center of gossip. In this quiet corner of America, no one expected that behind the closed doors of one of the houses on Oak Street, a story would break out that would shake the entire town. 20-year-old twins Emily and David Clark seemed to be ordinary young people. Both studied at a local college, worked part-time in a cafe, and dreamed of the future. Their family was considered exemplary. Parents, John and Margaret, raised their children strictly, but with love. However, in 1985, an event occurred in the Clark house that destroyed their reputation and forever changed the lives of everyone involved. This story began with a forbidden intimacy that no one suspected and ended in a tragedy that the whole state was talking about. It all started when Emily and David, always inseparable, began to spend even more time together. Neighbors noticed that they often secluded themselves, avoiding friends and even parents. Their relationship, which seemed like just a strong family bond, hid something more. Rumors soon began to circulate in the city, but no one could imagine what this relationship would lead to. At the center of this story are not only feelings that crossed the boundaries of morality, but also a chain of events that led to irreversible consequences. In this story, we will analyze how this drama began, what circumstances pushed the young people to take a fatal step, and how the police solved the case that shook Liberty. This story is based on true events, although names and some details have been changed to protect privacy. We follow Emily and David from the early days of their intimacy to the moment their secret becomes public knowledge. We delve into the details of the investigation, the witnesses' testimonies, and the circumstances that led to their tragic ending. This is a story about how personal decisions can turn into disasters, and how a small town is confronted with a shocking truth. In the spring of 1985, Liberty was living its usual life. The town, with a population of about 20,000 people, was a typical American suburb. Neat houses with lawns, a church where almost all the residents gathered on Sundays, and a local college where young people from the neighborhood flocked. Emily and David Clark were well known in Liberty. The twins, born a few minutes apart, were inseparable since childhood. They shared toys, studied in the same class, and even chose the same courses in college. Emily, with long brown hair and a calm disposition, studied psychology. David, slightly taller than his sister, with the same brown eyes, was interested in history. Both worked part-time at the Marge Cafe, where they served coffee and hamburgers to locals. Their parents, John and Margaret, were respected people. John worked as an engineer at a local factory, and Margaret kept accounts at a small firm. The Clarks lived in a two-story house on Oak Street, which always smelled of freshly cut grass. Neighbors described them as friendly but reserved. The Clarks rarely invited guests and preferred to spend time with their family. Emily and David, despite their sociability, also kept to themselves. They rarely went to parties, preferring to spend evenings at home or in the park, where they were often seen together, whispering about something. In early 1985, the twins' behavior began to change. Emily began to show up at cafes less often, citing school, and David began to skip college classes. Their friends noticed that they were avoiding socializing. One of Emily's friends, Sarah Miller, later told police that she tried to invite Emily on an outing, but Emily declined, citing that she had to be with David. Neighbors also began to notice strange behavior. Mrs. Henderson, who lived across the street, saw Emily and David sitting in the backyard late at night, holding hands. She dismissed it, thinking that it was just brother and sister being close. But something was happening in the Clark household that no one suspected. Emily and David, who had always been close, began to transcend the boundaries of normal sibling relationships. What had begun as innocent conversations at night gradually developed into something more. They spent hours in David's room, locking the door to keep their parents out. John and Margaret, busy with work, did not notice the changes. They assumed that the children were simply stressed out about school. But in March 1985, the situation became more complicated. Emily began to avoid her parents, and David became irritable. At the same time, rumors began to spread around town. A worker at Marge's, Linda Thompson, noticed that Emily and David often exchanged glances when they thought no one was looking. She told other employees, and soon the whispers began to spread. However, no one dared to speak out about it openly. The Clarks were a respected family, and such speculation seemed unthinkable. Nevertheless, the tension in the house on Oak Street grew. Emily and David became increasingly secretive, and their relationship became increasingly dangerous. By April 1985, The twins had almost completely withdrawn from their friends and acquaintances. They spent their days together, avoiding prying eyes. One evening, Margaret caught them in Emily's room, sitting too close to each other. She asked what was going on, but David snapped that they were just talking. Margaret, alarmed, told John about it, but he dismissed it as teenage tantrums. No one could have predicted that this closeness would lead to events that would shake Liberty. By the summer of 1985, the atmosphere in the Clark home on Oak Street had grown noticeably heavier. Liberty, despite its idyllic appearance, was a town where news traveled fast, and rumors of Emily and David Clark's strange behavior began to gather steam. Locals who were accustomed to discussing everything from gas prices to high school baseball games now whispered about the twins. At Marge's, where Emily and David still occasionally showed up for shifts, customers noticed that they barely spoke to their coworkers and kept to themselves. Linda Thompson, the head waitress, later told police that she once saw David gently tug at Emily's hair when they thought no one was looking. The gesture, though seemingly innocent, left Linda with a sense of unease she couldn't explain. Emily and David, meanwhile, were falling deeper into their secret relationship. They spent nights in each other's rooms, exchanging long conversations that became increasingly personal. What had begun as an emotional connection had escalated into something they both knew was taboo. Neither of them, however, made any effort to stop. Emily, according to her diary, which police would later find, wrote of feeling guilty, but also that she couldn't imagine life without David. David, for his part, became increasingly withdrawn, avoiding even casual conversations with his parents. John and Margaret Clark began to notice changes in their children's behavior. Margaret, always attentive to detail, noticed that Emily had stopped wearing her favorite bright dresses, preferring to wear closed clothes, even in the heat. David, previously open and cheerful, became irritable and often snapped at his father when he asked about his plans. In June 1985, Margaret tried to talk to Emily, but she avoided the conversation, citing fatigue. John, busy working overtime at the factory, believed that the children were simply going through a difficult period at college. He suggested that Margaret not press them, hoping that everything would work out on its own. But the rumors were growing louder in town. At the local church, where the Clarks regularly showed up on Sundays, Pastor Johnson noticed that Emily and David had stopped attending services. He called Margaret to ask if everything was okay, but she assured him that the children were simply busy with their studies. Meanwhile, at college, professors began to notice that the twins were skipping classes. Emily's psychology professor, Dr. Wilson, wrote to her asking for an explanation, but received no response. David, in turn, stopped turning in his history essays, although he had previously been a top student. By July 1985, tensions in the Clark household had reached a fever pitch. One evening, John returned home earlier than usual to find Emily and David sitting in the living room on the couch, strangely silent. He asked what was going on, but David quickly went to his room and Emily muttered something about homework. John, alarmed, decided to talk to Margaret. They were beginning to suspect that their children were hiding something serious, but they couldn't figure out what it was. Margaret suggested that they hire a family counselor, but John declined, thinking it unnecessary. At the same time, an event occurred in Liberty that distracted attention from the Clarks. An abandoned car with a broken window was found in a local park, sparking speculation about possible crime. Liberty police, usually busy with petty theft and drunken disorder, began an investigation, but the case quickly became a dead end. No one connected the incident to the Clarks, but it added tension to the already unsettled atmosphere of the town. Emily and David, feeling pressure from their parents and rumors in town, began to act even more cautiously. They stopped appearing together in public, but their meetings at the house continued. Their diaries, which would later be examined by police, contained entries about their fear of being discovered. Emily wrote, "We know it's wrong, but we can't stop. What if someone finds out?" David, for his part, spoke of feeling angry at anyone trying to separate us. These entries would become key to investigators, but at the time no one suspected how far things would go. By the end of July 1985, the situation had reached a critical point. Emily began talking about moving away from Liberty, away from her parents and prying eyes. David supported the idea, but they had no money and no plan. Their desperate attempts to keep the secret only increased their isolation. Neighbors, friends, and even their parents sensed that something was wrong, but no one dared intervene. This chapter of the Clarks' lives was approaching a turning point that no one could have foreseen. By August 1985, tensions were running high at the Clark home on Oak Street. Liberty, despite the summer heat and relaxed atmosphere, was gripped by rumors of Emily and David Clark's strange behavior. Locals, accustomed to a quiet life, began to notice that the twins were rarely seen in public. Their shifts at Marge's became rare, and they stopped attending classes at college. Teachers and friends tried to contact them, but Emily and David avoided all contact. Their parents, John and Margaret, sensed that the situation was getting out of control, but they were unsure what to do. Emily and David, consumed by their secret affair, spent almost all their time indoors. They stopped even going outside, afraid of the neighbors' prying eyes. Their relationship, which had begun as an emotional intimacy, now completely took over their lives. Emily's diary, later discovered by the police, contained entries about how she struggled with guilt but could not give up David. "He's the only one who understands me," she wrote. David, for his part, became increasingly obsessed with protecting their relationship at any cost. His entries were filled with anger at his parents and society, who he believed would never understand them. In early August, Margaret decided to take drastic action. She had noticed Emily and David locking themselves in David's room for long hours, and this was making her uneasy. One evening, she knocked on the door and demanded an explanation. David opened the door, but his gaze was cold and distant. Emily, standing behind him, looked pale and frightened. Margaret asked what was going on, but David said they were just discussing school. Margaret did not believe him, but she did not insist. She shared her concerns with John, who, although skeptical, agreed to talk to the children. The conversation took place a few days later, on August 10th. John gathered the family for dinner and asked Emily and David point blank why they had become so distant. Emily remained silent, staring at her plate, and David responded sharply that they were adults and had a right to privacy. John, not used to such a tone, lost his temper and forbade the children to lock themselves in their rooms. This only made the situation worse. David left the house, slamming the door, and Emily burst into tears and ran to her room. Margaret, feeling helpless, suggested calling a family psychologist, but John again refused, believing that this was a temporary rebellion. Meanwhile, in Liberty, rumors about the Clarks grew more and more persistent. Mrs. Henderson, a neighbor, told a friend that she had seen David come home late at night with Emily waiting for him at the door. This information reached Linda Thompson at the coffee shop, who shared it with others. Soon rumors of unnatural intimacy between the brother and sister began to spread throughout the town. No one spoke of it openly, but at church and local gatherings people whispered, casting sideways glances at the Clarks. By mid-August, Emily and David had made a desperate decision. They began planning their escape from Liberty. They had no money and no clear plan, but they were determined to leave to preserve their connection. David suggested selling their father's old car, which was sitting in the garage, but Emily was afraid that this would attract attention. They began packing their belongings, hiding them in backpacks, and discussed moving to another state where no one knew them. However, their plans were interrupted by an unexpected event. On August 15th, Margaret returned from work early to find Emily and David in the living room at a moment that left no doubt as to the nature of their relationship. Shocked, she screamed for an explanation. David tried to calm his mother down, but Emily, unable to bear it, ran out of the house. Margaret, in tears, told John everything. He, unable to believe it, decided to talk to the children immediately, but David also left, leaving the parents in disarray. That evening, John and Margaret decided to seek help from the local priest, hoping that he could influence the children. The situation was escalating, and the Clarks were on edge. Emily and David, sensing that their secret was about to be revealed, began to act impulsively. They returned home late at night, after their parents were asleep, and continued to discuss running away. However, their conversations became increasingly desperate. David, in his entries, mentioned that he would do anything to protect Emily. Emily, in turn, wrote about the fear of losing her brother, but also that she saw no way out. By late August, Liberty was electrified with rumors. The police, not yet involved in the Clark case, were busy investigating minor incidents around town. No one suspected that a tragedy was brewing in the house on Oak Street that would change the town forever. By the end of August 1985, the situation at the Clark home on Oak Street had become critical. Liberty, a small town in Missouri, was going about its business as usual, but rumors about Emily and David Clark's strange behavior were spreading at an alarming rate. Neighbors, friends, and even casual acquaintances were discussing what was going on in the Clark household, although no one dared to voice their suspicions directly. Emily and David, feeling the pressure, were becoming increasingly withdrawn. Their plan to flee town, which they had been talking about for weeks, remained unfulfilled due to a lack of money and the fear of being caught. After an argument with their parents on August 15th, when Margaret caught the twins in a compromising situation, Emily and David tried to avoid John and Margaret. The parents, shocked by the discovery, tried to find a way to fix the situation. Margaret insisted on meeting with Pastor Johnson, and on August 20th, they attended church to discuss the children's behavior. The pastor offered to organize a family meeting with a psychologist, but John, still hoping to solve the problem on his own, refused. He believed that a stern talk with the children would put everything in its place. However, Emily and David refused to talk to their parents, spending most of their time in their rooms. On the night of August 25, 1985, an event occurred at the Clark home that changed everything. Around midnight, neighbors heard loud noises coming from Oak Street. Mrs. Henderson, who lived across the street, later told police that she saw lights in the Clark's windows, although the house was usually dark at that time. She also noticed that John's car was in the garage, but no one was leaving the house. On the morning of August 26th, Margaret did not show up for work, which was unusual for a woman who was usually punctual. A worried co-worker of Margaret's called the Clark home, but there was no answer. That same day, around noon, Linda Thompson of Marge's Cafe reported to police that she had not seen Emily and David for several days, even though they were supposed to be on shift. Liberty Police, who were not usually faced with serious crimes, sent a patrolman to check on the Clark's home. Officer Thomas Reed arrived at Oak Street around 2 p.m. The door was locked, but through the window he noticed a mess in the living room, an overturned chair and scattered papers. Reed called for backup, and police soon entered the house. Inside, they found evidence of a struggle. In the living room, there were stains on the floor that would later be determined to be blood. In the second-floor bedroom, police found Margaret Clark unconscious. She was taken to hospital, but doctors were unable to save her. John Clark was found in a garage in serious condition. He was also hospitalized, but he survived. Emily and David had disappeared and their whereabouts remained unknown. The police immediately issued a wanted notice for them, suspecting that they were involved. The investigation began quickly. Investigators found a diary in Emily's room in which she described her feelings for David and her fear of being exposed. In David's room, they found notes in which he mentioned his willingness to protect his relationship with Emily at any cost. This evidence confirmed suspicions that the twins were involved in an illicit relationship that led to the tragedy. Police also found traces of blood in the garage and the weapon believed to have been used in the incident, a heavy wrench. In Liberty, the news spread quickly. Residents were shocked. The Clark family, considered a model family, was at the center of a horrific drama. The police interviewed neighbors and colleagues, trying to reconstruct the chronology of events. Mrs. Henderson spoke of noise on the night of August 25th, and Linda Thompson mentioned the twins' strange behavior in the cafe. Pastor Johnson reported a conversation with Margaret, confirming that she was concerned about the children's behavior. By the evening of August 26th, police received a tip that Emily and David had been spotted at a gas station 50 miles away in Liberty. Their car, John's old Ford, was found on the side of the highway, but the twins were gone. The investigation was gathering momentum, and Liberty was the focus of local media attention. By the morning of August 27, 1985, Liberty was in shock from the events at the Clark home. The police, who had issued a wanted notice for Emily and David Clark, expanded the search beyond the city limits. News of the Oak Street tragedy spread throughout the state of Missouri, and local newspapers began publishing the first articles about what had happened. The residents of Liberty, accustomed to a quiet life, could not believe that such a tragedy had occurred in their town. The police, meanwhile, focused on finding the twins and collecting evidence to restore the full picture of what had happened. On the evening of August 26th, police received a tip that Emily and David had been spotted at a gas station in a small town 50 miles outside of Liberty. Their car, John Clark's old Ford, was found abandoned on the side of the highway. Inside were backpacks filled with clothes, some cash, and a note written by Emily, "We didn't mean for this to happen. Sorry." The note became a key piece of evidence that confirmed that the twins had fled town after the incident. Police believed they were headed to Kansas City, where they could have disappeared into the crowd. On August 28th, Kansas City police received an anonymous call from a motel worker reporting seeing two young men who looked like Emily and David. A police patrol arrived at the motel and detained the twins without resistance. Emily appeared depressed, and David remained silent, refusing to answer questions. They were taken to the Liberty police station for questioning. During the investigation, it was discovered that the night of August 25th was a turning point. According to David's testimony, Margaret, having learned of the nature of his relationship with Emily, threatened to tell the authorities. In panic and desperation, the situation spiraled out of control, leading to tragic consequences. John Clark, who survived the incident, testified from the hospital. He said he tried to intervene when Margaret confronted the children, but was too late to prevent the situation from escalating. Police identified the weapon used in the incident as a wrench from the garage. An examination confirmed that traces of blood in the house belonged to Margaret and John. Emily and David admitted their guilt, but claimed they had not intended the consequences. Their lawyers later claimed the twins had acted in a state of emotional breakdown. The trial began in November 1985 and attracted media attention across the state. Prosecutors presented Emily and David's diaries as evidence of their forbidden affair and motives. The public was shocked by the details of the case, and liberty became synonymous with scandal. In January 1986, Emily and David were found guilty of multiple charges, including manslaughter and assault. Emily received a 5-year sentence, and David received 7, given his more active role in the incident. Both were sent to separate correctional facilities. John Clark, recovering from his injuries, left Liberty shortly after the trial. He sold his house on Oak Street and moved to another state, avoiding contact with the press. The town gradually returned to its normal life, but the Clark story remained in the minds of residents. The Marge's Cafe, the church, and the local college long discussed the incident, and some neighbors admitted feeling guilty for not intervening sooner. The story of Emily and David Clark is an example of how personal decisions can have disastrous consequences. What began as a connection to find solace during a difficult time in their lives turned into a tragedy that tore apart a family and rocked a small town. An investigation revealed that a lack of open communication within the family and the pressures of societal norms played a role in the escalation of events. The Liberty Police, unaccustomed to such cases, handled the investigation professionally, but questions about whether the tragedy could have been prevented remain unanswered. This story is a reminder of the importance of paying attention to loved ones and how quickly secrets can spiral out of control, changing lives forever.